The first strange thing about the forest was the silence. Not the peaceful kind campers talk about in guidebooks. This silence felt layered, as if sound itself had been packed down beneath the trees and buried under moss. When you spoke, the words didn't travel far. They seemed to press outward and then sink, absorbed by bark and soil. We noticed it the moment we stepped off the trail. "Listen," Mark said. We did. Nothing. No wind through branches. No insects. Even our boots sounded wrong. Muted, like we were walking across thick carpet instead of leaf litter. "Probably weather," Jess said. "Storm system moving somewhere." But the sky above the canopy was clear, pale blue between the pine needles. We kept hiking. The campsite was supposed to be an old ranger clearing a few miles past the marked trailhead. Mark had downloaded the coordinates weeks earlier. No signal out here, but his GPS still worked. By the time we reached the clearing, the sun had lowered enough that the trees stretched long shadows across the ground. It looked untouched, a circle of flattened earth surrounded by towering firs. No fire ring, no footprints, no signs anyone had camped there in years. "Perfect," Mark said. We dropped our packs. At first everything felt normal. Tents went up. Jess strung a line between two trees for the lantern. I gathered fallen branches for a small fire. The smell of pine sap mixed with smoke, and for a while the forest felt almost friendly. But the silence never changed. Even the fire sounded strange. Instead of crackling freely, the pops seemed contained, short, abrupt, as if something around us was muffling the air. Jess noticed it first. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "Hear what?" I said. "My voice," she said quietly. "It echoes wrong." She clapped her hands. The sound bounced off the trees, but not evenly. The echo returned from behind us first, even though the clearing opened toward the opposite side. Mark laughed it off. "Trees are weird with acoustics." Maybe they were. Still, none of us wandered far from the fire that night. The second strange thing was the gear. Morning came without birds. Not one. The sunlight slid down through the branches in pale beams, and the clearing looked exactly the same, except our equipment wasn't where we left it. Jess's lantern hung from a different branch. Not a nearby one. A completely different tree. "Did you move this?" she asked. Mark shook his head. I hadn't touched it either. We checked the rest of camp. My boots had been placed neatly beside Mark's pack, even though I remembered leaving them near the tent. The cooking pot sat upside down on a rock. Our water bottles were arranged in a straight line beside the fire pit. No footprints. No disturbed soil. Jess frowned. "Animals don't do that." Mark crouched beside the bottles, studying them. "They'd knock stuff over," he said. "Not organize it." The silence around us thickened. We laughed it off again, but the laughter came out forced. "Maybe we sleepwalked," Jess said. No one believed it. By the afternoon, the forest had started moving. Not visibly, but things changed when you weren't looking. The path we'd hiked in on, the narrow line through the ferns, seemed thinner, harder to follow. At one point Mark walked 30 yards toward it and stopped. "Was that tree always there?" he asked. A fallen trunk now blocked the trail. Jess and I stared at it. Neither of us remembered climbing over it yesterday. "Maybe we came around the other side," I said. Mark didn't look convinced. When we turned back toward camp, the clearing felt slightly wrong. The tents were closer together. Not by much, maybe a foot or two, but the space between them had definitely shrunk. Jess whispered, "Did we stake them this close?" No one answered. That night we heard the forest breathing. It began after midnight, a low, slow exhale moving through the trees. Not wind. Wind rustles leaves. This sound was deeper, like air sliding through hollow wood. It moved around the clearing in long circles. Whenever it passed behind a tree, the shadows shifted slightly, stretching and compressing as though something large was stepping between the trunks. Mark unzipped his tent. "You guys hear that?" Jess whispered from hers. "Yeah." The sound paused. Then it repeated. But this time the breath came from inside the clearing. Right beside us. The lantern flickered. I could see the fabric of Mark's tent ripple. Not outward from the wind, but inward, as if something outside was pressing gently against it. Testing it. The breathing stopped. Then the forest went silent again. Morning came slowly. Gray light seeped through the trees. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then Jess screamed. We rushed to her tent. Her sleeping bag lay open on the ground. Except it wasn't open. The zipper had vanished. In its place ran a thick seam of dark thread. Stitched, perfectly even. From the inside, Jess's voice shook. I woke up and couldn't move, she said. The zipper wouldn't open. I had to cut through the side. She held up a pocket knife. Mark picked up the sleeping bag, turning it over. The stitching wasn't messy. It was precise. Each loop identical, as though made by something that had studied sewing carefully, but didn't understand how zippers worked, or why people needed them. My stomach tightened. Check hours. Mark's bag was the same. So was mine. All three had been sewn closed from the inside. We packed immediately, or tried to, because the campsite had changed again. The tents weren't where we left them. They had shifted inward overnight, forming a tighter triangle around the fire pit. The trees seemed closer too. Not physically closer, but their trunks leaned slightly toward the clearing, like listeners bending toward a conversation. Jess grabbed her backpack. Let's go. Now. We headed for the trail. Except the trail wasn't there anymore. The fallen trunk Mark noticed yesterday was gone. In its place stood a dense wall of ferns and thin saplings. No opening. No, Mark muttered. He pulled out his GPS. The arrow pointed forward, straight into the trees. We pushed through. Branches brushed against our arms. Behind us, something shifted. I turned. The clearing looked smaller. The tents had moved again. Now they sat almost touching, like they were closing. Jess whispered, "It's learning." "What is?" I asked. She pointed to my sleeping bag strapped to my pack. The seam along the zipper had changed. New stitches had appeared overnight. Longer ones, more confident, as if whatever made them had practiced. A distant sound echoed through the forest. Fabric sliding across fabric. Then another, and another. Mark slowly turned around. The clearing behind us wasn't empty anymore. Our three sleeping bags lay on the ground. Except we had packed them. Except now they were back. Each one slightly larger. Slightly reshaped. The fabric twitched softly, the way cloth moves when someone inside shifts their weight. Jess whispered, "We left those." But the sleeping bags didn't open. They only tightened. The seams along their lengths pulled inward, stitching themselves closed again, loop by careful loop. Learning. Testing. Mark backed away. "Don't touch them." The forest remained silent. Then, somewhere deep between the trees, we heard another sound. More fabric. Hundreds of soft threads pulling tight. Not behind us. Ahead. Jess looked at the trees. "The path," she said quietly. "What about it?" Her voice barely rose above a breath. "I think it's sewing." The fire had burned low sometime in the night. I woke because the forest had gone quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Not the gentle quiet of sleeping woods. This was dense and padded, as though the air itself had been stuffed with wool. The tent fabric pressed lightly against my cheek. Outside, something shifted. Not footsteps, just a faint repositioning of weight somewhere beyond the fire pit. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. The silence stretched until my ears began inventing sounds. Soft creaks in the branches. A distant crackle of cooling coals. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just the night settling around us. I fell back asleep. When morning arrived, it arrived slowly. Light seeped through the pines in pale gray columns, like diluted smoke drifting down through the canopy. The fire pit sat in the center of our campsite, surrounded by stones we dragged into a ring the evening before. But something was wrong with it. I noticed it the moment I stepped out of the tent. "Aaron," I said quietly. He crawled out behind me, still half asleep. What? I pointed. At first he didn't understand what he was looking at. Then he froze. A trail of teeth led away from the fire pit. They weren't scattered. They were placed. Each tooth sat upright in the dirt, root buried slightly, the crown pointing toward the trees like a tiny white marker. The line began at the edge of the fire pit stones and continued into the forest, curving gently between the trunks. Aaron stepped closer. Are those? Yes. They were human teeth. At least they looked human. Molars, incisors, a few long canines. All clean. No blood. No fragments of bone. Just enamel and root, polished almost smooth. How many? He whispered. I started counting but lost track after 20. The line continued past the first row of trees. We stood there for a long time, staring. Behind us, the tent zipper slid open. Mara stepped out. What are you guys? She stopped. Her eyes followed the trail. Did you do that? She asked. Neither of us answered. The silence of the forest pressed inward. No birds. No insects. Even the breeze had stopped. The smell in the air was strange too, sweet and mineral, like damp stone and something faintly sour beneath it. Mara crouched near the first tooth. Don't touch it, Aaron said. I'm not. She leaned closer. They're warm. I felt the skin along my arms tighten. From the fire? I said. But the first tooth sat nearly 2 feet from the fire pit stones. The warmth shouldn't have reached that far. Mara stood slowly. Look at the spacing. She was right. Each tooth had been placed exactly the same distance apart, about 8 inches from the next, forming a careful, measured path, like stepping stones, or breadcrumbs. Aaron turned in a slow circle. No footprints. The dirt around the fire pit remained undisturbed except for our own tracks from the night before. The teeth had simply appeared, placed, carefully, deliberately. We packed slowly after that. The forest felt wrong now. Every movement seemed louder than it should have been. Fabric rustling, buckles clicking, the soft thump of gear being folded. But the sound didn't travel. It sank into the trees and stopped. Aaron finished rolling his sleeping bag and looked toward the tooth trail. We should follow it, he said. Mara stared at him. Why? Because someone put it there. And that's exactly why we shouldn't. He hesitated. I understood the pull, though. The trail wasn't chaotic. It was orderly, intentional. It suggested direction, purpose. And in a forest where the trails on our map had already faded into guesswork, direction felt valuable. Aaron crouched beside the fire pit again. Look, the first tooth had shifted. Not fallen, turned. The pointed end now faced slightly left of where it had been before. Mara stepped back. Did you move that? No. We all looked toward the trees. The shadows between the trunks seemed deeper now, layered like curtains of smoke. Aaron stood. That's wind. There's no wind, Mara said. We waited. Nothing happened. Then, quietly, the second tooth rotated too. Just a fraction. But enough that we saw it. Aaron swallowed. They're pointing somewhere. I glanced down the line. The teeth didn't lead randomly into the forest. They curved around the clearing and disappeared into a narrow gap between 2 leaning firs. A space I didn't remember seeing before. Was that there yesterday? I asked. Neither of them answered. The opening looked like a trail. Not a real one, no worn dirt or broken branches, but the trees formed a corridor just wide enough for a person to pass through. Aaron picked up his pack. We're not lost if something is guiding us. Mara's voice dropped. Guiding us where? He didn't respond. The forest smelled stronger now. That same mineral sweetness, mixed with something faintly familiar, like the inside of a dentist's office. Aaron stepped toward the first tooth. The moment his boot touched the dirt beside it, the forest reacted. A soft creak rippled through the trees. Branches tilted slightly inward. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Mara grabbed my arm. Did you see that? The canopy above us shifted as if adjusting its weight. Aaron froze. Okay. he said quietly. Maybe we don't. A sound interrupted him. From deeper in the forest. A voice. My voice. Hey! It called. Aaron's head snapped up. Did you? I hadn't spoken. The voice came again, slightly farther away. Over here. It sounded exactly like me, but thinner, flattened, as if someone had learned the shape of my voice without understanding how breath worked. Mara whispered, "Don't answer it." The trees leaned closer. Not enough to block the sky, but enough that the clearing felt smaller. The third tooth rotated slowly in the dirt. Then the fourth. The entire line began adjusting itself, each piece turning with quiet precision until they all pointed directly toward the narrow gap between the firs. Aaron took a step back. Something wants us to go there. The voice called again. Closer now. Aaron. It was his voice this time, perfectly accurate. Even the slight rasp at the end of his name. Aaron's face drained of color. That's not. The forest answered with another sound. Dozens of small taps. We looked down. The teeth were moving, not crawling, just turning again, slowly, deliberately, aligning themselves more carefully along the path. As though correcting a mistake. Mara backed toward the tents. We're leaving. Aaron nodded quickly. Yeah. But when we turned toward the trail we'd used to reach the campsite, it wasn't there anymore. The trees had shifted. Their trunks leaned together in a wall of bark and shadow. Where's the path? Mara whispered. I turned slowly. The only open space left in the forest was the narrow corridor marked by teeth. The smell of enamel and stone filled the air. Aaron's voice, his real one, barely rose above a whisper. It's hurting us. From the darkness between the firs came another voice. Not mine, not Aaron's, not Mara's. It sounded older, patient. Follow. The teeth ahead of us began to sink into the soil, one by one, disappearing, only to reappear farther along the path. Reset. Waiting. Mara stared into the corridor of trees. Her voice trembled. That's not a warning. The forest leaned inward, narrowing the clearing behind us. Aaron adjusted his pack slowly. No, he said. Ahead. Another tooth rose from the dirt. Bright, perfectly placed. I felt the pull then. Not curiosity. Recognition. Like remembering a path I'd walked before. And somewhere deeper in the forest, beyond the leaning trees and shifting shadows, I realized something else. The trail wasn't just leading us forward. It was learning how fast we moved, so it could stay just far enough ahead.